And here we are. Good evening, my beloved friends, foes, hamburgers, and hobgoblins. Lovely to see you all. I'm Tad, idol of dozens. And I'm here. I'm here to read. I'm here to hang out. I'm here to do all of those things. And I'm glad to have you hanging out with me this evening or this morning or wherever you may happen to be, because of course it's quite far into the night on my end of things. So lovely to see you. I'm sitting here. Look, I'm even wearing a short-sleeved shirt, a summertime shirt, because there ain't no cure for the summertime shirt. Sorry, that's an old Eddie Cochran reference. Anyway, good to see you, as I said. And I'm going to be reading from the Dragonbone chair tonight, continuing with the Dragonbone chair, leaping into chapter 6, where the serious stuff starts to happen. Although, as I mentioned to you, not that most of you probably haven't read the book, of the folks who are listening, or quite a few of you anyway, the real fireworks begin around chapter 12. But as I said, we spend some time setting things up in this world first, which I explained at nauseating length the other evening to you guys, I think. So anyway, what else is going on? So we're still in the midst of various household work. So literally the entire last week was spent with the sound of several electric sanders going at one time, because we're having our railing and deck repainted, which requires stripping off the old paint with large, grinding, noisy devices. I described it to one of our friends as like being surrounded by very large mosquitoes for like 8-9 hours every day. But the workers are very good people, and they're doing a very good job. So no complaints about that. But it has made it interesting working. And somehow, in the midst of all of this, I have managed to continue writing The Navigator's Children. Even wrote, like, not 100 pages, but, I've done, like, probably 60 or 70 since the last time I talked to most of you, which is a pretty good pace. It's actually a very good pace. But a lot of that is because, as I was saying to Deb the other night when we were talking about these kinds of things, a lot of it is because in any book, whether you're talking about a single volume or you're talking about a multi-volume story, there are, you tend to, by the time you sat down to write it, if you're like me anyway, you have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen in the beginning. And you should have at least some working idea of what's going to happen at the end. Then, as you write, you're filling things in as you go. And almost of necessity, the middle part is the least pre-planned. There may be one or two events which are crucial, and those are pre-planned. But, you sort of just figure, well, I know where I want the thing to go eventually. But what that means is that when you wind up in a situation that I'm at, especially after so long working on these books and the pandemic slowdown and the publishing change slowdown and all kinds of other things, I'm now working on stuff I've been thinking about for years. So at the very least, one of the nice things about the current state of affairs is when I get up on a given day and start thinking about what I'm going to work on, I already have a lot of ideas. There's a lot of things that are already in train in the parts I'm working on, because I'm bringing everything together. But it's also stuff that, that the parts ahead of me, which are getting smaller and smaller as I near the end of the book, the parts ahead of me have more and more things that I've been thinking about and which have been slowly being locked into place as I've given up on certain possible other ways to do something. If you want a more explicit description of that, those of you who might be budding writers out there, I'll be doing some broadcasts at some point on world building and some of my processes. Not that I think I'm necessarily somebody to learn from, not in the sense that I have some kind of platonic ideal of how writers should write. I'm a huge believer, actually, that everybody in every field, and especially any field that calls on creativity and imagination, everybody finds their own way. There is no real one size fits all for anything to do with writing or art or music, or it just doesn't exist. You find your way, you bring your influences with you, and as you synthesize from those influences, you begin to develop something that is, you hope, unquestionably yours. And that's how it works. That's why there's nothing wrong with copying. That's why there's nothing wrong with people's first efforts being derivative. Of course they are. How else do you learn? I mean, there's maybe a one in a billion person that shows up with such incredible genius that they are seeing, an artistic mode in a different way from the moment that they start, and are not influenced at all by previous purveyors or craftspeople of that same art form. But like I said, that's, maybe one in a billion. All the rest of us, we learn by doing, and we learn by appreciating other things and seeing what we like. And then as we get more proficient, trying to learn what it is that those other people, our predecessors, did that affected us, and, that we wanted to, if not reproduce exactly, that we wanted to reproduce the effects or the feelings or just simply the reader satisfaction. In my case, I wanted to make books that felt as important to me as some of the books that hit me when I was at my most susceptible, which is one of the reasons I went into fantasy, because that fantasy and science fiction were that for me. I later on branched out and became much more widely read and became very interested in a lot of subjects and a lot of different kinds of writing from many eras of the craft. But initially, when I really fell in love with books, as first as a child and then later on as a teenager, it was all centered around different kinds of fantasy. So that was what I most wanted to try to achieve on my own, was that feeling that was given to me. And as I've said to people, as I've said to readers over the years, it honestly is, when somebody tells me something about an effect my book has had for them, or had for them when they were younger, or whatever the case may be, that's the thing I most want. I want that more than critical praise. I enjoy that more than critical praise. I'm not, I want enough money to not die and for my family to not die, but money does not drive me. And as I said, critical praise does not drive me. Even peer praise does not drive me, although that's something that I value when I get it. Absolutely, of course. But what does drive me is when I feel like I, in some way, have had an effect on somebody else, the way that my favorite writers and my favorite books and my favorite stories, which includes other media, have had on me. So that's my benchmark for success, if that makes sense. I think it does. Okay, so before I start reading, let's just quickly go down the list of folks who have checked in and say hello. So we've got Ronnie first on the top. Good morning, Ronnie Graham. Good morning to you. Suzanne, good morning to you. Pleasure to have you both here. I'm not implying that they showed up together. They just the first two on the list. Holger, good morning. And what are we doing today other than sleeping and listening to the second reading? Well, I'm the one doing the second reading, so obviously I'm not doing much else. But in general, as I mentioned, I'm staying very busy. Who else is here? Mark Redman in this case. Good morning, good morning. Good to see you. Wouter, good to see you. And, a very fun beer festival last night. Well, congratulations for being up. It must be a fairly early hour of the day, so I'm impressed. I don't do many beer festivals anymore, but like the most interesting man in the world commercials we had here in America, when I do beer festivals, I don't get up for readings in the morning. Anyway, so Suzanne reports that she is going later in the morning heather hunting up in the Yorkshire Dales. Oh, my wife would just swoon to be going with you. She's having a very, very strong, very powerful, overwhelming Englishness, because she hasn't been back to England for a while. Well, actually, neither of us have. And we're trying to figure out when we can get there for a good visit. So Deb is very, very Englishy at the moment. And we're watching a lot of English stuff, archaeology, history, just all kinds of stuff, but much of it English. And I think that's part of the reason. It's we're massaging her England gland, I guess, or something. Emily, hello, Em. And that is my British niece's daughter, Em. Hello, Em. Good to see you. Oftentimes people in the family check in, probably just to make sure that I'm not dead yet. And reports suggest I am not. Julian, or Julian. Oh, from Kassel, of course. Yeah, Julian. Right. Okay. Hello. Anyway, good to see you. Chris, guten Morgen. And Cliff, good evening and good morning to you too. My family as well, and I'm glad to hear that your family is out of quarantine. Oh, we even went ice skating today. Did you go to the what is it called? The place where the Sharks play? We did that once. We went ice skating there. Oh, nonetheless, 1 star would not recommend. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that if that's where you went, because we had a good time there, but you may have gone somewhere else. Anamika, good morning. Good morning. Yes, I have lots of Anamika saying that she enjoyed the background information to the Dragonbone chair at the start. Actually, I have more, and I'll kind of disperse it as I go, because otherwise this is only a rereading. But, what I can remember at this far advanced stage from when I originally wrote it, I'll be happy to pass some stuff along. Here's a good trivia thing before I start tonight's book. Some of you out there know, but not too many, I think, that Simon's original name, before he was Simon, in the Dragonbone chair was Martin. And I don't remember exactly why I picked that. It was certainly not because of George R.R. Martin, although I already knew some of his short stories and at least one of his novels, but didn't know George personally at that point. So it wasn't anything to do with him or Martin Guitars or anything, but I can't tell you why I picked Martin. I think I just liked the name. And then I eventually went for Simon because of a number of, what's the word I'm looking for? Congruences between the name of Simon and some other things. There was, first of all, Simple Simon, so the idea of Simon as the kind of holy fool. There was the expression Simon Pure, which again kind of connotes innocence. And last but not least, within the Judeo-Christian, whatever you want to call it, I kind of think of it as another folk mythology of sorts. Some people I know, many people I know, believe that it is, the absolute word of truth. And that's fine if that's how you see it. But whatever the case, Simon Peter was Peter who became, he was actually Simon, but Peter was the rock, and he was Christ's rock on which the church was founded, etc., etc. So there was a connotation there, and Simon was a fisherman. And as you may have guessed, well, you've already seen in the Dragonbone chair that Simon's father was a fisherman. So there is a certain coherence there. So that's why I changed the name to Simon before I started writing the book, although I had done a lot of the original preparatory material, including the outline or the beginning of the outline for my publishers with the name Martin. Similarly, Binabic's original name was Billabil. Bilabil, Billabil, and had something to do, I don't remember exactly what it was. I liked it in part because it sounded a little bit like Boabdil, but that's a long and bizarre sidetrack. So let me continue saying hello to the people who are here. Anyway, Stephen, hello. Smart Shirt Sunday. Yes, well, as I said, short sleeve, summertime. Herr Unangst. Good to see you. Hazel, there's my mother-in-law. Good morning, sweetie. Much love to you. Your lovely daughter is upstairs sleeping lovelily. Lovelily? I don't know what the adverb would be if you tried to make an adverb out of that. Loverly. I guess. But that's not really an adverb. That's more of an adjective. Anyway, doesn't matter. Good morning. Good to see you. Lots of love from here. Ilva, hello, darling. Oh, God, are you still in rehab? Oh, get better. Get better, sweetie. I hate to hear that you're still going through that stuff. That makes me angry. Angry. Not at you, but at the stuff. Sandra, hello, hello. Good morning to you. Christina, good morning, good morning. Good. I'm glad you're enjoying the reread. Holger, I already said hello to, I think. If I didn't, hello again, but I think I did. Lisa, and there's my sister-in-law, and they're just all filtering in to say hello. So hello to you, Lisa, and lots of love. Good to see you. Sean, hello, Sean. Good to see you. Sonia, hello, hello. Oh, Suzanne, Deb would love to go walking. Excuse me, to go walking with you in the Dales. Deb went to Manchester, and she still has a lot of friends in the Manchester area, and she used to spend time sometimes in the family homes of some of these people. So she spent a lot of time kind of trooping around in Yorkshire, and it's still the most, I think, in a lot of ways. Obviously, where she grew up was the most formative part of her life geographically, but Manchester also huge, and now California, and California and London. So, but Manchester, considering it was the shortest of those spans, is the biggest in Deb's life. In terms of its intensity. So who else have I not said hello to? M. Okay, off to do Elsie's breakfast. All right, well, that sounds like a good plan, M. Lovely to see you, however, virtually, and thanks for stopping in. The 1 star was for COVID, and Cliff and his family did go to the place where the Sharks play. Yes, it is a nice ice rink. Lisa watched Desolation of Smaug. Oh, excellent. Glad to hear it. I thought Benedict Bumbershoot, whatever his name is, did a very good job as the voice of Smaug, and apparently also crawling around wearing what's called the mocap suit. Because he, that's how they make things. But I mean, when you consider that he was wearing a mocap suit to be turned into a 200-foot-long, scaly, four-legged creature, you can tell he must have done a really intense job trying to look like a dragon. Who else have I not said hello to yet? I think, is that everybody? Rosalba, hello, hello. And Sean, I think I said hello to, but it doesn't matter. I'll say hello again anyway, just in case, because that's the important thing. Ohana, nobody gets left out or left behind. Nobody gets forgotten or left behind, or whatever that is. It's been a long time since I saw that movie, since my children were that movie age. Anyway, Elliot, hello, hello. Nice of you to come in from Aotearoa in New Zealand. As you know, I've been to New Zealand a couple times, loved it, would love to get back. Andre, hello, hello. Good to see you. And May, good morning, good morning. So, those are all the folks that have left their imprimaturs on the chat column over here. I'm sure there are a few others out there who are too shy, and that's okay. Everybody welcome. Everybody is welcome. I'm just like that little person lady in Poltergeist, if you ever saw that. Come in, children. All are welcome. All are welcome. Or is that Mr. Rogers? Or both? All right. So now we are going to read. And what we are reading is Chapter 6 of The Dragonbone Chair. The Cairn on the Cliffs. Simon's punishment for his most recent crime was suspension from his new apprenticeship and confinement to the servants' quarters. For days he strode the boundaries of his prison, from the scullery to the linens room and back again, restless as a hooded kestrel. I have done this to myself, he sometimes thought. I'm just as stupid as the dragon says I am. Why do they all make such trouble for me? He fumed at other moments. Anyone would think I was a wild animal that can't be trusted. Rachel, with a form of mercy in mind, found a series of petty tasks to which he could turn his hand. The days did not pass as excruciatingly slowly as they might have, but to Simon it seemed only more proof that he was to be a draft horse forever. He would fetch and haul until he was too old to labor any longer, then be taken out back and knocked on the head with Shem's splintered mallet. Meanwhile, the final days of Novander crept by, and Decander sidled in like a sneak thief. At the end of the new month's second week, Simon was given his freedom, such as it was. He was forbidden Green Angel Tower and certain other favorite haunts. He was allowed to resume service for the doctor, but given additional afternoon chores which required him to return promptly at dinner time to the servants' quarters. Even these short visits, however, were a grand improvement. In fact, it seemed that Morghennes was more and more coming to rely on Simon. The doctor taught him many things about the uses and care of the fantastic variety of oddments littering the workshop. He was also painfully learning to read. It was infinitely more laborious than sweeping floors or washing dusty alembics and beakers, but Morghennes drove him through it with a determined hand, saying that without letters Simon could never be a useful apprentice. On St. Tunith's Day, Decander the 21st, the Hayholt was bustling with activity. The Saint's Day was the last high holiday before Aiden Mansa, and a mighty feast was being laid on. Serving girls set sprigs of mistletoe and prickly holly around dozens of slender white beeswax candles. These were all to be lit at sunset, when their flames would pour light from every window, summoning wandering St. Tunith in from the midwinter darkness to bless the castle and its occupants. Other servants stacked pitchy new split logs in the fireplaces or strewed fresh rushes on the floor. Simon, who had done his best all afternoon to remain unnoticed, was nevertheless discovered and deputed to go to Dr. Morghennes and find if he had any oil suitable for polishing things. Rachel's troops had used up all the available supply, putting a blinding gloss on the great table, and work had barely begun on the main hall. Simon, who had done his best all afternoon to remain unnoticed, Simon, who had already spent an entire morning in the doctor's rooms, reading aloud word by boggling word from a book entitled The Sovereign Remedies of the Rana Healers, still infinitely preferred anything Morghennes might want of him to the horrors of Rachel's steel-glint gaze. He practically flew from the main hall, down the long chancellery hall, and out into the inner commons beneath Green Angel. He was across the moat bridge seconds later like a sparhawk on the wing. Only moments passed before he was at the doctor's doors for the second time that day. The doctor did not answer his knock for some time, but Simon could hear voices within. He waited as patiently as he could, picking long splinters from the weathered doorframe, until at last the old man came. Morghennes had seen Simon only a short while earlier, but made no comment on his reappearance. He seemed distracted as he ushered the young man in. Sensing his strange mood, Simon followed quietly down the lamplit corridor. Heavy draperies cloaked the windows. At first, as his eyes adjusted to the darkness of the chamber, Simon could see no sign of any visitor. Then he made out a dim shape sitting on a large sea chest in the corner. The gray-cloaked man was gazing at the floor, face concealed, but the boy knew him. "Forgive me, Prince Josua," Morghennes said. "This is Simon, my new apprentice." Josua Lackhand looked up. Sorry, I was startled because once again I've gone out of focus on my version. Josua Lackhand looked up. His pale eyes, were they blue? Gray? Flicked over him with an air of detachment, as a haircut trader might examine a horse he did not intend to buy. After a moment's inspection, the prince turned his attention back to Morghennes as completely as if Simon had just winked out of existence. The doctor motioned for the boy to go and wait at the far end of the room. "Highness," he said to the prince, "I'm afraid there is nothing further I can do. My skills as a doctor and apothecary have been exhausted." The old man rubbed his hands together nervously. "Forgive me. You know that I love the king and hate to see him suffering, but some things are not to be meddled in by such as I. Too many possibilities, too many unforeseeable consequences. One of those things is the passing of a kingdom." Now Morganes, whom Simon had not seen in this sort of mood, plucked an object on a golden chain out of his robe and handled it agitatedly. In Simon's knowledge, the doctor, who loved to scorn pretension and show, had never worn jewelry of any kind. "But God curse it, I am not asking you to interfere with the succession." Joshua's quiet voice was taut as a bowstring. Having to overhear such a conversation embarrassed Simon tremendously, but there was nowhere for him to go without making himself even more conspicuous. "I ask you to meddle with nothing, Morganes," Joshua continued. "Only give me something that will make the old man's last moments easier. If he dies tomorrow or next year, Elias is still the High King, and I am still liege lord of only Naglamond." The prince shook his head. "At least think of the ancient bond you and my father share. You who have been his healer and have studied and chronicled his life for scores of years." Joshua swept his hand across his body to point at a pile of loose book leaves stacked on the doctor's worm-board writing desk. Writing about the life of the king? Simon wondered. This was the first he had heard of such a work. The doctor seemed very full of secrets this morning. Joshua was still trying. "Can you not take pity? He is like an aged lion at bay, a great beast being dragged down by jackals. Sweet Eucyrus, the unfairness." "But, Highness," Morganes had painfully begun when all three in the room became aware of the sound of running feet and voices in the courtyard outside. Joshua, pale-faced and fever-eyed, was on his feet with his sword drawn so quickly it seemed to have simply appeared in his left hand. A loud pounding shook the door. Morganes, starting forward, was restrained by a hiss from the prince. Simon felt his heart racing. Joshua's obvious fear was contagious. "Prince Joshua! Prince Joshua!" someone called. The rapping resumed. Joshua scabbarded his sword with a flick and moved past Dr. Morganes into the workshop corridor. He flung the door open to reveal 4 figures standing on the courtyard porch. 3 were his own gray-liveried soldiers. The last, who dropped to one knee before the prince, was dressed in a shining white robe and sandals. Dreamily, Simon recognized him as St. Tuneth, long dead subject of countless religious paintings. What could this mean? "Oh, Your Highness," said the kneeling saint, and stopped to catch his breath. Simon's mouth, which had begun to quirk upward in a grin as he realized that this was only another soldier dressed up to enact the saint's part at tonight's festivities, now froze as he saw the stricken look on the young man's face. "Your Highness, Joshua," the soldier repeated. "What is it, Dernoth?" the prince demanded. His voice was strained. Dernoth looked up. Dark, rough-cut soldier's hair framed in the white gleam of his hood. He had, in that moment, true martyr's eyes, blasted and knowing. "The king, Lord, your father, the king. Bishop Demetrius said that he is dead." Soundlessly, Joshua pushed past the kneeling man and was gone across the courtyard. the soldiers trotting behind. After a moment, Daernoth rose too and followed, hands clasped monkishly before him as if the breath of tragedy had changed imposture to reality. The door swung listlessly in a cool wind. When Simon turned to Morghennes, the doctor was staring after them, his old eyes shining and brimful. So it was that King John Presbyter died at last on St. Tuneth's Day, at an exceedingly advanced age, beloved, revered, and as thoroughly a part of his people's lives as the land itself. Although it had been long expected, still the sorrow of his passing reached out and touched all the countries of men. Some of the very oldest remembered that it had been on Tuneth's Day in the founding year 1083, exactly 80 years before, when Prester John had slain the devil worm, Shurakai, and ridden back in triumph through the gates of Urchester. When this tale was retold, not without some embellishing, heads nodded wisely. Anointed by God as king, they said, as revealed by that great deed, then taken back to the bosom of the Redeemer on its anniversary. It should have been foreseen, they said. It was a sad midwinter, an Aidentide, although people flocked to Urchester and the high castle from all the lands of Ostenard. Indeed, many of the local folk began to growl about the visitors who came to take up the best benches in church, and the same in the taverns. There was more than a little resentment of outlanders making such a fuss over their king. Although he had been master of all, John had been more like a simple fief-holder to the townsmen of Urchester. In younger, haler days, he had loved to go out among the people, cutting a beautiful figure, all gleaming armored and a horseback. The citizens of the town, in the poorer quarters at least, often spoke with familiar, possessive pride of our old man up to the hayholt. Now he was gone, or at least out of the reach of such simple souls. He belonged to the history scribes, the poets, and priests. In the 40 days mandated between the death and burial of a king, John's body went to the hall of preparing in Urchester, where the priests bathed it in rare oils and rubbed it with pungent herbal resins from the southern islands, then bound it up from ankle to neck in white linen, saying all the while prayers of overmastering piety. King John was next clothed in a simple gown of the type used by young knights at their first vows, and gently laid on a bier in the throne room, slender black candles burning all around. As Prester John's body lay in state, Father Helfkeen, the king's chancellor, ordered the Haefer kindled atop the rock fortress at Wentmouth, something done only in times of war and great happenings. Few living could remember the last time the mighty torch tower had been fired. Helfkeen also commanded a great pit to be dug at Swartcliffe, on the headlands east of Urchester, overlooking the Kinslaw, the windy hilltop where stood the 6 snow-thatched barrows of the kings who had held the hayholt before John. It was miserable weather for digging, the ground winter-frozen, but the Swartcliffe laborers were proud and suffered the biting air and bruises and broken skin for the honor of the task. Much of the chill month of Jonaver passed before the excavation was completed, and the pit was covered with a vast tent of red and white sailcloth. Preparations at the hayhold proceeded at a less deliberate pace. The castle's 4 kitchens glowed and smoked like busy foundries as a horde of perspiring scullions prepared the funeral baked goods, the meats and bread and festival wafers. The seneschal Peter Gildedbowl, a small fierce man with yellow hair, was everywhere at once like an avenging angel. With equal facility he tasted the broth billowing in giant vats, looked for dust in the cracks of the great table, thin chance, since that was Rachel's province, and threw imprecations after scurrying servitors. It was, all agreed, his finest hour. The morning party gathered at the Hayholt from all the nations of Ostenard. Skali Sharpnose of Kaldskreik, Dukas Grimner's unloved cousin, arrived from Rimmersgard with 10 suspicious, deep-bearded kinsmen. From the 3 clans that among them ruled the wild, grassy thrivings came the march thanes of their reigning houses. Oddly enough, the clansmen put enmity aside for once and arrived together, a token of their respect for King John. It was even said that when news of John's death reached the Thrivings, the Rand warders of the 3 clans had met at the borders they guarded so jealously against each other. Weeping together, they had drunk to John's spirit all through the night. From the Sancellan Mahastrevis, the ducal palace in Naban, Duke Leobardus sent his son, Benegaris, with a column of legionaries and mail-clad knights, numbering almost 100 head. As they disembarked from the warships, each of the 3 with Naban's golden kingfisher on its sail, the crowd at wharfside oohed appreciatively. A few respectful cheers were even raised for Benegaris as he passed, mounted on a tall gray palfrey. But many people whispered that if this was the nephew of Camarus, greatest knight of the age of John, then he was a cutting from his father's tree and not his uncle's. Camarus had been a mighty, towering man, or so said those old enough to have remembered him, and Benegaris, truth to tell, looked to run a little to fat. But it had been almost 40 years since Camarus Sa Vinita had been lost at sea. Many of the younger folks suspected that his stature had grown somewhat in the memories of gaffers and gossips. Another great delegation also came from Naban, one only slightly less martial than Benegaris's. The Lector Renesson himself sailed into the Kinslaw on a beautiful white ship, upon whose azure sail gleamed the white tree and golden pillar of Mother Church. The wharfside crowd, which had greeted Benegaris and the Nabanite soldiers mildly, as if in dim remembrance of days when Naban had striven with Erkenland for mastery, hailed the lector with a loud, welcoming cry. Those gathered on the quay surged forward, and it took the combined force of the king's and lector's guardsmen to hold them back. Still, some 2 or 3 were crowded so that they fell into the bone-cold lake, and only swift rescue saved them from freezing. "This is not as I would have wanted it," the lector whispered to his young aide, Father Denivan. "I mean, just look at this gaudy thing they have sent me." He gestured at the litter, a splendid creation of carved cherry wood and blue and white silks. Father Denivan, robed in homely black, grinned. Renesson, a slender, handsome man of nearly 70 years, frowned down in annoyance at the waiting litter, then gently beckoned over a nervous Erkenguard officer. "Please take this away," he said. "We appreciate Chancellor Helfkin's thought, but we prefer to walk near the people." The offending conveyance was hustled away, and the lector moved toward the crowded Kinslaw stairs. As he made the sign of the tree, thumb and small finger as hooked branches, then a vertical stroke with the middle fingers, the jostling crowd slowly opened an aisle up the length of the great steps. "Please don't walk so fast, master," said Denivan, pushing past reaching, waving arms. "You'll outpace your guardsmen." "And what makes you think?" Renesson allowed a mischievous smile to cross his face, so quickly none but Denivan saw. "That this is not what I am trying to achieve?" Denivan cursed quietly, then immediately regretted his weakness. The lector had gained a step on him, and the crowd was pushing in. Luckily, the dockside wind now sprang to life, and Renesson was forced to slow down, clutching with his unoccupied hand at his hat, which seemed nearly as tall, thin, and pale as his sacredness himself. Father Denivan, seeing the lector begin to tack slightly into the wind, struggled forward. When he caught up with the older man, he took a firm grip on an elbow. "Forgive me, master, but Escritor Velagus would never understand if I were to let you fall into the lake." "Of course, my son." Renesson nodded, continuing to trace the tree in the air on either side of their progress up the long, wide staircase. "I was thoughtless. You know how much I despise this unnecessary pomp." "But, Lector," Denivan argued gently, lifting his bushy eyebrows in a look of mock surprise, "you are Eucyrus Adon's worldly voice. It won't do to have you scrambling upstairs like a seminary boy." Denivan was disappointed when this raised only a faint smile. For a while they climbed in silent lockstep, the young man retaining his protective grasp on the older man's arm. "Poor Denivan," Renesson thought. "He tries so hard and is so careful. Not that he doesn't treat me, the lector of Mother Church, after all, with a certain lack of respect. Of course he does, because I have allowed it, for my own good. But I am not in a light mood today, and he knows it." It was John's death, of course, but not merely the loss of a good friend and fine king. It was change, and the Church, in the person of Lector Renesson, could not afford to trust change too easily. Of course, it was also the parting, in this world only, the lector reminded himself firmly, from a man of good heart and intention, although John certainly had been at times over-direct in the fulfilling of those intentions. Renesson owed much to John. Oh my God, I completely forgot this. Renesson owed much to John, not least that the king's influence had played a large part in the elevation of the former Oswine of Stanshire to the heights of the church, and eventually to the lectorship. God bless it, I forgot that he was actually Erkenlandish. Gonna have to change that whole accent from now on. Anyway, Renesson owed much to John, not least that the king's influence had played a large part in the elevation of the former Oswine of Stanshire to the heights of the church, and eventually to the lectorship that no other Erkenlander had held in 5 centuries. The king would be much missed. Fortunately, Renesson held hope for Elias. The prince was undoubtedly courageous, decisive, bold, all traits rare in the sons of great men. The king-to-be was also short-tempered and somewhat careless, but Dios will stay. These were faults, often cured or at least softened by responsibility and good counsel. As he reached the top of the Kinslaw stairs and entered with his struggling retinue onto the royal walk that circumscribed the walls of Urchester, the lector promised himself that he would send a trustworthy advisor to help the new king, and, of course, to keep a wary eye out for the church's welfare. Someone like Velagus, or even young Denivan. No, he wouldn't part with Denivan. Anyway, Renesson would find somebody to counteract Elias's bloody-minded young nobles and that blowing idiot, Bishop Demetus. The 1st of Faever, the day before Elysia Manza, Lady Day, dawned bright, chill, and clear. The sun had barely scaled the steepled peaks of the far mountains when a slow, solemn crowd began to file into the Hayholt's chapel. The king's body was already lying before the altar on a bier draped in cloth of gold and black silk ribbons. Simon watched the nobles, in their rich, somber dress with resentful fascination. He had come to the unused choir loft straight from the kitchen, still wearing his gravy-stained shirt. Even crouched, hidden in the shadows, he felt ashamed to be so poorly clad. And me, the only servant here, he thought. The only one of all who lived in the castle with our king. Where are all these fancy lords and ladies from? I recognize only a few. Duke Grimner, the two princes, some others. There was certainly something wrong that those seated in the chapel below should be so splendid in their funeral silks, while he carried the stink of the scullery on him like a blanket. But wrong in what way? Should the castle serving help be welcomed in among the nobles? Or was he himself at fault for daring to intrude? What if King John is watching? He felt a chill as he thought about it. What if he is somewhere watching? Will he tell God that I snuck in wearing a dirty shirt? Lector Renesson entered at last, arrayed in the full circumstance of his holy office robes of black, silver, and gold. On his head he wore a wreath of sacred cyan leaves, and he held a censer and a wand crafted from black onyx. Motioning the crowd to their knees, he began the opening prayers of the Mansa Sea Quelofsen, the death mass. As he called out the lines in his rich but still ever so slightly accented Nabani, and sensed the body of the dead king, it seemed to Simon that a light shone on Prester John's face, that he could see for a moment how the king must have looked when he had first ridden, bright-eyed and battle-stained, out of the gates of the new conquered Hayholt. How he wished he could have seen him then. When the numerous prayers were finished, the company of nobles rose to sing the Cantum Falis. Simon contented himself with mouthing the words. As the mourners sat down again, Renesson began to speak, surprising everyone by abandoning Nabani to use the country plain westerling speech that John had made the common tongue of his kingdom. It may be remembered, Renesson intoned, that when the last nail had been driven into the execution tree and our Lord Eucyres was left to hang in terrible agony, a noble woman of Naban named Pelippa, daughter of a mighty knight, saw him, and her heart was filled with pity for his suffering. As the darkness fell that first night while Eucyres Adon hung dying and lone, for his disciples had been scourged from the temple courtyard, she came to him with water, which she gave to him by dipping her rich scarf in a golden bowl and then bringing it to his dry lips. As she gave him to drink, Pelippa wept to see the ransomer's pain. She said to him, "Poor man, what have they done to you?" Eucyres answered her, "Nothing that poor man is not born to." Now Pelippa wept afresh, saying, "But terrible enough that they kill you for words, without also they hang you, heels high, for the sake of humiliation." And Eucyres the reclaimer said, "Daughter, it matters not which way I hang, top first or the opposite. I am still looking full into the face of God, my Father." So then, the lector lowered his gaze to the assemblage, as was said by our Lord Eucyres, so may we say it is with our beloved John. The common people in the city below us say that John Presbyter is not gone, but remains to watch over his people and his Ostenard. The book of the Adon promises that even now he has ascended to our beautiful heaven of light and music and blue mountains. Others, our brethren, John's subjects in Hernistir, will say that he has gone to join the other heroes in the stars.
It matters not. Whatever he is, he who was once young John the King, be he enthroned in bright mountains or stellar fields, we know this, he is happily gazing full into the face of God. When the lector had finished speaking, tears standing in even his eyes, and the final prayers had been recited, the assembled company left the chapel. Simon watched in reverent silence as King John's black-clad body servants began their final services in his behalf, stalking like beetles around a fallen dragonfly, dressing him in his royal raiment and war gear. He knew he should leave. This was beyond sneaking and spying. It bordered on blasphemy. But he could not make himself move. Fear and sorrow had been replaced by a strange sense of unreality. Everything seemed a pageant or mummer's play, the characters moving stiffly through their parts as though their limbs were freezing and thawing and then freezing once more. The dead king's servants dressed him in his ice-white armor, tucking his folded gauntlets into his baldric but leaving his feet bare. They drew a tunic of sky blue over John's corselet and pulled a shiny crimson cloak about his shoulders, moving all the while as slowly as fever victims. His beard and hair were knotted up in war braids, and the iron circlet that signified mastery of the Hayholt was set upon his brow. At last No.2, the king's aged squire, brought out the iron ring of Fingil, which he had been keeping back. The sudden sounds of his grief shattered the enveloping silence. No.2 sobbed so bitterly that Simon wondered how he could see through his tears to slip the ring onto the king's white finger. Finally, the black cloth beetles lifted King John back onto his bier. Draped in the cloth of gold mantle, he was carried out of his castle for the last time, 3 men on each side. No.2 followed behind, carrying the king's dragon-crested war helmet. In the shadows of the loft overhead, Simon released what seemed an hour's worth of prisoned breath. The king was gone. As Duke Isgrimnur saw Prester John's body pass out through the Nerula gate, and the procession of nobility began to fall into place behind, a slow, fog-shrouded feeling overtook him, like a dream of drowning. "Don't be such an ass, old man," he told himself. "No one lives forever, and even if John did take a mighty swipe at it." The funny thing was, even when they had stood side to side in the screeching hell of battle, the black-fletched Thrithing's arrows whistling past like Udin's own, God's own lightning, Isgrimnur had always known that John Presbyter would die abed. To see the man at war was to see a man anointed by heaven, untouchable and commanding, a man who laughed as the blood mist darkened the sky. If John had been a Rimmersman, Isgrimnur smiled inwardly, he would have been a bear shirt for certain. But he is dead, and that's the hard thing to understand. Look at them, knights and lords. They thought he'd last forever too. Frightened, the greater part of them. Elias and the lector had taken their places directly behind the king's bier. Isgrimnur, Prince Josua, and fair-haired Princess Miriamel, Elias's only child, followed closely. The other high families had taken their places as well, with none of their usual elbowing for favorable position. As the body was carried down the royal walk toward the headlands, the common people fell into step at the rear, a huge crowd, quieted and overawed by the procession. Resting on a bed of long poles at the base of the royal walk lay the king's boat, Sea Arrow, in which it was said he had long ago come to Erkenland out of the Westerling Islands. It was but a small vessel, no more than 5 ells in length. Duke Grimner was glad to see that its woods had been new lacquered until they glimmered in the dim Fey-ever sunlight. Gods, but he loved that boat, Grimner remembered. Kingship had left him scant time for the sea, but the Duke recalled one wild night, 30 years or more ago, when John had been in such a mood that nothing would do but that he and Grimner, a young man then, must get Sea Arrow rigged and go out upon the wind-lashed Kinslaw. The air had been so cold it stung. John, almost 70 years old, had whooped and laughed as Sea Arrow bucked on the high swells. Grimner, whose ancestors had taken to land long before his time, had held on tightly to the gunwale and prayed to his many old gods and his one new one. Now the king's servants and soldiers were laying John's body into the boat with great tenderness, lowering it onto a platform that had been prepared to hold the bier. 40 soldiers of the king's Erkenguard picked up the long poles and placed them on their shoulders, bearing the boat up and carrying it forward. The king and Sea Arrow led the vast company, half a league along the headlands above the bay. At last they reached Swertcliff and the grave. The covering tent had been removed, and the hole was like an open wound, beside the 6 solemn rounded barrows of the Hayholt's earlier masters. On one side of the pit stood a massive pile of cut turves and a heap of stones and undressed timbers. Sea Arrow was laid down on the grave's far side, where the earth had been dug down at a shallow angle. When the boat came to rest, the noble houses of Erkenland and the Hayholt's servants filed by, each to place some small thing in boat or barrow as a token of love. Each of the lands beneath his high ward had also sent something of mighty craft, that Prester John might carry it with him to heaven. A robe of precious Risa Island silk from Perdruin, a white porphyry tree from Naban. Grimner's party had brought from Elvertshala in Rimmersgard a silver axe of Dverning make, with mountain blue gems in its haft. Luth, the Hernestiri king, had sent from the Tag at Hernesadhark a tall ashwood spear, all inlaid with red gold and with a golden point. Okay, let's go to the end of this section. We may go a few minutes past. The noon sun seemed to hang too high in the sky, Duke Grimner thought, as he made his way forward at last. Though it rolled unhindered across the gray-blue dome of the sky, it seemed to hold back its warmth. The wind blew harder, skirling across the cliff top. Grimner carried John's battered black war boots in his hand. He could not find it in his heart to look up at the white faces that peered from the crowd like glimmers of snow in the deep forest. As he approached Sea Arrow, he looked one last time at his king. Although paler than a dove's breast, still John looked so stern and fine and full of sleeping life that Grimner caught himself worrying for his old friend lying out in the wind this way with no blanket. For a moment he almost smiled. John always said I had the heart of a bear and the wit of an ox, Grimner chided himself. And if it be cold up here, think how chill it will be for him in the frozen earth. Grimner moved carefully but nimbly around the steep ramp of earth, using a hand to steady himself when necessary. Although his back hurt him fiercely, he knew no one suspected it. He was not too old to find some pride in that. Taking John Presbyter's blue-veined feet in his hands one at a time, he slipped the boots on. He silently commended the skilled hands in the house of preparing for the ease with which his task was accomplished. Without looking again at his friend's face, he quickly took the hand and kissed it, then walked away, feeling stranger still. Suddenly it seemed to him that this was not his king's lifeless husk that was being condemned to the soil. The soul fluttered free like a newly unfurled butterfly. The suppleness of John's limbs, the so familiar face in repose, as Grimner had seen it countless times when the king snatched an hour or two of sleep in the lull of battle. All these things made him feel as though he deserted a living friend. He knew John was dead. He had held the king's hand as the last breaths fluted out of him. Still, he felt a traitor. So possessed was he by his thoughts that he nearly stepped into Prince Josua, who moved nimbly around him on his path to the barrow. Isgrimner was shocked to see that Josua carried John's sword Brightnail on a grey cloth. "What happens here?" Isgrimner wondered. "What is he doing with the sword?" As the Duke reached the first row of the crowd and turned to watch, his unease deepened. Josua had laid Brightnail on the king's chest and was clasping John's hands about the hilt. "This is madness," the Duke thought. "That sword is for the king's heir. I know John would have wanted Elias to have it, and even if Elias chose to bury it with his father, why does he not lay it in the grave himself? Madness. Does no one else marvel at such a thing?" Isgrimner looked from side to side, but saw nothing on the faces around him but sorrow. Now Elias walked down, passing his younger brother slowly like a participant in a stately dance, as in fact he was. The heir to the throne bent over the gunwale of the boat. What he sent with his father no one could see, but it was noted by all that, although a tear sparkled on Elias's cheek when he turned, Josua's eyes were dry. The company now made one more prayer. Renessan, robes billowing in the lake breeze, sprinkled Sea Arrow with holy oils. Then the boat was gently lowered down the sloping pitfall, soldiers laboring in silence with their heavy staves, until it lay at last a fathom deep in the earth. Above, timbers were raised into a great arch, and workmen laid turves about, one atop the other. Finally, as stones were being lifted into place to complete John's cairn, the mourning party turned and made its slow way back along the cliffs above the Kinselaw. And that's where we're stopping. Not too bad, only 2 minutes over. Anyway, so with that, I am going to wrap it up for the night. I will, of course, be back to read more of this tonight at 7 p.m. my time. For those of you who will be listening instead or otherwise catch up or just like, come on, I know this book so well. Or even, I don't care. That's all good. For those who care, I will be back to read again some more also, same time as this, next week. So I am going to be back with you reading as we go through the Dragonbone chair. And I still may think of something else I decide to do, but for now, we're reading the Dragonbone chair. So with that, I thank you for your company. I thank you for your patience. I apologize for forgetting that Renessan. I couldn't remember. I'm going like, one of these guys is a Nabani, and one of these guys is, but I can't remember which one is which. Oh my God. And then I thought, and then why did they make such a big deal out of blah, blah, blah. I'm like all back in my head again. But I apologize for giving Renessan a southern accent when it should have been more Erkenlandish, if you know what I mean. Anyway, with that, I say thank you. Be good to yourselves. Be good to those around you. Be good to those who need it especially. And we will all persevere. And in the end, we will triumph. So thank you again for joining me. Good night. Ciao. Good morning. Peace.